So first, some general tips on, deciding what you want for an officer structure. So at the very minimum, you need a president, a VP, a treasurer, and a secretary. But after that, it's kind of up to you. If you have a lot of people interested, you can tailor things to them. You can create officer positions specifically for certain types of jobs or for people to support what their interests are. So some things to consider. Do you have clear expectations and responsibilities for officers as a whole, as well as for each specific position? So this is important because at least where I come from, my chapter that I am currently advising for is San Diego State, which is California's Xi. And one thing that we have laid out is you have a general, like what all the officers do, those expectations are written down for all the officers. And then whoever has a named position, so your president, treasurer, secretary, VP, whatever, they have extra roles and responsibilities on top of that baseline. But it's just important that you establish the baseline because everyone's going to be doing that. So make sure you have a clear level of expectation. And that way, when you explain the role to somebody else, they can pick up on it really quickly. Another thing to mention, so is it clear who an officer should go to if they encounter a problem or if they need help? If you have like a hierarchy structure, it's easy to have them refer to the next person up. So just keep that in mind. Who can they ask if they're looking for advice? What does your chapter have a specific focus or several that could use a specified officer position? So this is kind of like what I was talking about earlier. So if you have, for example, say you're like, oh, it'd be really nice if we had somebody that could help us with advertising. Well, that's a good, extra thing to add where you can say, oh, we might need a photographer. So find a person who maybe a member who's very interested in photography. That person could be an officer for you. So sort of tweak and make sure you pay attention to the candidates that you bring on and the members who come to your events and whatnot, because they might have specific interests that align with the goals that you want to accomplish later on in that semester or quarter. So do you have a variety of time commitments in your position? So you have to remember that not everybody has the same level of time. And so you want to be willing to, be straightforward with them and tell them this is exactly what you should expect. And then you can grab people and bring them on based on that. So not every officer position needs to have the same amount of time of commitment. Things like president might be more than somebody who's, for example, a photographer, but be straightforward with your members or whoever you're bringing on and be willing to accommodate their, interests and their time commitment. So the last one is, would you benefit from creating committees of officers and members to work on specific areas? So this is generally geared for larger chapters. This is like if you want a specified group of people who are only focused on one type of thing, solving one type of problem. This is great if you have people who don't really care about, for example, if you want to plan a banquet, they really like planning the banquet after initiation, but they don't really care about, all of the other stuff before that. They want to focus on making sure this part of the event runs really well. That's a great opportunity for you to create a committee if you have the large number of officers to support that, or members if you have a large member pool, and then get them involved in that regard. And then that can be used to pool officers from later on. All right, so general tips on recruiting officers. So direct one-on-one recruitment will get you officers that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And a lot of the time, people just kind of need a nudge in the right direction and to be shown that, that you think that they are capable of being an officer. So definitely, if you know friends, if you know officers, and we'll get to this later too, but if your officers have connections, leverage those. That's a great way to recruit. And it can be hard, but if you have a plan, which is the next bullet point, it helps out the recruitment process a lot. So if you know what you want to get done that year, you have goals in mind, you can recruit people based on those, like we need somebody to do XYZ for this goal, then it helps you for your focus for recruitment and find people suited for that role. So yeah, leverage connections to current officers, try to diversify your different majors that are represented, because then it lets you get different kinds of members. That way your entire officer team or your entire member pool is not just ME or electrical engineering or whatever it is. You get a wide variety of people, and therefore you get a wide variety in your officer team. So be honest about time commitment, and then recruitment begins with the initiation process. So this is kind of what I was talking about earlier. You have to make an effort to get to know your initiates and your candidates. You have to make them feel comfortable, wanted, because only then will they want to become officers. If they see value, if they think that they are adding value, if you show them that you think they are adding value, they will want to become officers. So keep that in mind. Like, it doesn't start when recruitment season starts, it starts when you onboard them. And try to recruit new officers prior to district conference so they can attend. So district conference is that's a great energy booster for a lot of chapters. So if you can get new officers prior to district conference, then you can invite them to district conference, and they get to see kind of what that looks like, and they get the same kind of boost of energy that we all get when we go. And we talk about new ideas with other chapters and whatever it might be. So that's definitely also a plus point. All right, the golden rule for being a Talbot Pi president is to delegate. I couldn't get the font bigger than that. So this is very important. It's the job of the president is not to do everything, it's to make sure things get done. As a president, it's your responsibility to make sure that, okay, I'm going to use this phrase because it's stuck with me since I was president, but you want to feed and water your officers. And so you want to make sure that they're doing well, and therefore they can make sure the chapter runs well. It's not your job to do everything by yourself. So make sure you delegate, and that means getting officers on your side, recruiting people to help take on those tasks so that you are not the only one doing everything. Okay, second golden rule of being a Talbot Pi president is to communicate. I cannot emphasize this enough. Communication is very, very important. If you can't get across your ideas or your train of thought, it's impossible for them to be up to that level of what your expectations are. And people respond differently. So when you communicate with your officers, you have to meet them halfway. You don't, like, if somebody is better at responding to their text messages, then you have to text them. Or if somebody else is, I only pick up phone calls, then keep that in mind, that kind of thing. You want to communicate. The more you communicate, the smoother your team functions, the more it acts like a team, and the more things you get done.
The way I structured it when I built up the leadership team is I thought about the roles and interfaces for the organization. So the roles might be like a social or a volunteering event. So one person, I kind of liked having a person in charge of those. And then making sure you have all your interfaces covered. So like to nationals, to the school, stuff like that. So I ended up with around 10 in my year, which was a little big. So I like around 7.
My experience was for a much larger chapter. So we had a lot more demand for opportunities than opportunities existed. So we really tried to expand the opportunities available to match that demand. So both creating teams of officers so that we could have team leads for people to have a more intermediate level of officer experience, but also having non-officer leadership experiences so that people could have a less overwhelming or less intimidating entry into leadership within the organization, and then get to know it and go on and become an officer later.
That the best number of officers is however many you currently have. Maybe that's the second best. The more actual best is however many you want to have next semester, next quarter, next year. There really are no wrong answers. When I was an officer way back in the Ice Age, we had 4 officers and we ran the chapter just fine. But then we decided we wanted to do more, and so we needed more officers to do more, and so we brought more people on. And now the chapter that I was has 30 officers, and so over the course of a decade we went from 4 to 30, and obviously it's going to change. Or it's going to change as far as how officers interact and everything else. But I think it's perfectly fine to have 2 or 3 officers, 4 officers, and as long as you have a handful of people who are dedicated, you can make it work. There are no wrong answers to this question.
Yeah, we definitely had some trouble filling it. That's why I thought kind of 10 might have been a few too many. The things that I kind of ended up with we're having some of the officer positions kind of be intro positions. So like sometimes someone could do it if they just joined first year or second year, or yeah, first year. And then those people can fill in to be like president, vice president, and other newer people can fill into those ones. So kind of making it a multi-stage thing. And also just building a good social community so people feel comfortable committing the time, hanging out with their friends.
We didn't have much difficulty filling most of the officer positions, but filling some of the higher up ones like president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, oftentimes there was a lack of demand. And one of the things that we did to try and correct that, and I graduated before I got to see how effectively it worked, but creating some of those intermediate officer positions so that people don't have to jump straight from, publicity chair or social media, coordinator all the way up to president, like having a middle option so they can get their feet a little more wet first was something that we did to try and bridge that a little bit.
Like Kavya said during the slides, starting early, when they're a candidate, trying to feel them out, see if they want to, take on a leadership role, because then you have people in mind when it comes time to actually pick officers and you can encourage them. One of the things I found is engineers, or maybe this is just everybody, they don't necessarily think they're qualified for something like a leadership position, even though, everything in Tau Beta Pi, anybody can be trained to successfully accomplish any of these roles. And so everybody is qualified, but it's just a matter of, giving them that friendly nudge to get them to actually volunteer sometimes. And then as far as actually getting them to sign up, actually saying yes, what we found worked really well was doing officer elections immediately following initiation. You do initiation and then you have elections, 10 minutes later. Because that way everybody's there, everybody's excited about being in Tau Beta Pi, and more people will say, yeah, sure, I'll do something for next year.
When you're delegating and when you're assigning work, to be careful not to actually assign too little work. It's all the people in Tau Beta Pi are pretty motivated and qualified and competent. So I've found in my experience that if you give people not enough work or not meaningful work, they know that you're giving them that work. So a good way to stay motivated is giving them stuff that's worth doing and that needs to be done too.
In my experience, people will rise or lower themselves to your expectation. And so if you expect them to, participate every month or every week or whatever, they'll do that. But if being an officer is something that they can do for, 3 days at the beginning of semester and 3 days at the end of the semester, then you'll probably get them for the beginning of the semester, but then they're going to go find other things to do with their time during the middle of the semester, and then you may not get them back later. And so keeping them engaged is, regularly is important. Like Kyle said, giving them meaningful work. Some people will fall off, and that's a fact of life, right? We would love if nobody ever got disinterested, or if life never got in the way, school never got in the way, but it's going to happen. Don't be upset. It's regrettable, and those people probably feel just as bad that happened. So plan for that a little. You're going to have some attrition, and then try to get them back. Have a conversation with them saying, okay, well, we realize that your semester got busy. What can you do? Set expectations, have a conversation with them about it, because in many cases, something is better than nothing from those people.
Like when you find somebody who falls off and then you go talk to them. When I was president, I did that with a couple of people. Like semester came to an end, and in the beginning they were doing great, and then all of a sudden I didn't see them anymore. And so before the next semester started, I was like, hey, what's going on? How can I help you? Like, be more engaged next time. And most of the time it's like, oh, I just got busy, but I'll do more. But that conversation at least makes them realize that you think they're still valued there, and it makes them put their time towards that. I ended up doing was, I'll give you like a very specific example. So I had one officer who we have something called like general officer positions, which are like those in starting up, like you that's like the thing where everybody can kind of, it's just like stepping stone to something else. And so he was just a general officer. So he ran events, he participated in like committees and things and came to officer meetings, but then I just sort of saw him not coming to things anymore, and he wouldn't tell me that he wasn't going to make it. And so when the semester started, I pulled him aside. I said, I scheduled time with him, and I was like, hey, like, I just want to talk to you about why you're not around anymore. Like, I miss, like, you know, I don't see you anymore. And I was just curious why that was. Like, is there something that we could have been doing to keep you more engaged? Like, was there a project that you wanted to work on that we didn't get you to work on? Like, what were you expecting and what did we not give you? And when you start the conversation that way, at least he responded to me saying, oh, like, I really did just get busy, but like, I am interested in X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, next time we can make sure that the committees focus on that, do whatever they need to do to get that done, and like get you involved in that. But like, a lot of the times I think people just feel like they weren't valued when they were an officer. Like, nobody asked them about anything, nobody got them involved. And so having that conversation, like, what were you expecting? You know, how can we help keep you here? You know, that's kind of the route that I would take.
There's different situations where people might not be participating well. And you should have that in your head going in, that you might be guessing wrong on what their situation is. Like, it's possible that they're just being super lazy, super possible. It's possible that there has like some family issue, also very possible. So your first thing you say and kind of the way you start that conversation, you should be careful not to assume one of those things, and let them tell you, and work from there. So don't go in with necessarily a script in your head of, I'm going to say this, they're going to say this. Be a little bit ready to think on your feet, and just try to find something that works. It doesn't have to be a one size fits all.
You know, they're people too, which you could take as like, don't be mean, but that's not what I meant. You shouldn't be mean, but that's not what I meant. Is, you know, they are probably feeling just as bad. You know, they feel bad because they haven't done whatever. You know, they probably had expectations and then something happened and they couldn't meet them. Ideally, this conversation is a positive experience for both of you. You know, you get better understanding or some sort of agreement with them as far as what level of contribution they want to have, and it might be zero, but also, you know, it's therapeutic for them because they get to, you know, put everything out on the table and say, look, I recognize that I couldn't do what I wanted to do this semester or this year or quarter or whatever, and I'm looking to kind of reset and be better about it in the future. And so it's a nice opportunity to do that, and hopefully, if the conversation goes well, you know, they'll feel better, they'll feel more energized coming out of it as well.
Thing to add, so I think how to have that conversation was pretty well covered, but if it does kind of ultimately turn out that, you know, they simply don't have the time, or you can't elicit a response because they've checked out, or whatever issue they ran into is so bad that they're not responding, even if it's not really their fault. Like, I think having a plan for how you're going to get, or if you need to get their responsibilities taken care of, is important. I kind of went through this in the chat a little bit, but like when I was a chapter president, I had a couple officers that kind of fell off the face of the planet, and I made the decision there that the things they were responsible for ultimately weren't going to make or break the chapter, and just kind of let them smolder for the semester and get them repaired the next semester when a new officer came in. But that will really depend on what their responsibilities are and how stable and healthy your chapter is in the first place. If you're, you know, a big, healthy, active chapter, you have a lot more room for error on those sorts of things than if you're a smaller, you know, only got 5 people initiated last semester and you need all of them to contribute as officers kind of deal chapter. So really recognizing what your situation is, both in terms of your chapter health and the responsibilities that those missing officers were handling, will really inform what it is that you need to do if you can't get any response out of them. We went the make it equally inconvenient for everybody route and had ours Sunday evenings. We actually usually got almost everyone there, including most of the advisors. So that worked well for us. Maybe Sunday's not I would not recommend Saturday. You won't get anyone, but Sunday evenings worked well for us. Another thing there is recognizing who is critical and who is not. So if you have a tiered structure with like teams of officers, having the team leads present is perhaps sufficient. You obviously want to make it open to having everyone there so everyone can feel like they're at the same table. But if one of the people that's on a sub team isn't able to attend, maybe they still have a team meeting that they can attend instead of having to be present at every single one of the full officer meetings. So that can give you a little more flexibility as well.
Once we got big enough where this started becoming an issue where we couldn't find times that worked for everybody, because we didn't want to do the weekends, Mike, sorry, although that would have been a better option. But we started having 2 officer meetings whenever we had them. You know, we'd have an A and a B, and you'd go to one or the other as long as you went to one of them each time. It was okay. And then the presidents and vice presidents and maybe a couple other officers worked on running each of those meetings, and they just made sure that they talked. Obviously, as you get more officers, there's going to be more logistics, and that's just one of those things, is you got to make sure you're communicating between teams A and B, or officer meetings A and B, and stuff like that. But I also want to, you know, on the other side, since I know a lot of chapters are on the smaller side, you know, when we had 4 officers, we didn't even have officer meetings, right? Because we had a group chat, we were all friends with each other, and as long as, or at least we were all friendly enough with each other that we just had conversations as things came up. And so you don't necessarily have to have formal officer meetings if that works for your situation.
This is where advisors can potentially come in handy. The most extreme example I can think of from my time was one semester where the president was kind of half checked out, and so it was kind of the vice president and a cadre of advisors and other officers kind of picking up the slack under the table. You don't want to be in that situation. It makes people, you know, feel weird from a democratic standpoint, but like you do what you have to run the organization in that scenario. So I think leaning on advisors and knowing who your extra competent officers are that can help out in a pinch is really big there. Because it kind of depends on the situation and why they're less enthusiastic. If it's just a re-enthuse them, that's the easy and the hopeful situation. But if it's kind of they're starting to be checked out and you need to work around them, then knowing who you can go to make that happen is super important.
Sometimes, you know, you sign up for a position and it ends up not being what you wanted, you know, so have those conversations with those people, because maybe they'd be a better fit somewhere else. You know, there's nothing, it gets messy, but you know, there's nothing saying you can't have officers change positions in the middle of the year. Obviously there's logistical issues with that and training issues and everything else, but you know, at the end of the day, the goal, like Mike said, is you got to make it work. The other thing is try not to get to that point, right? Make sure you're communicating with your officers so that you can find these enthusiasm issues before they become, these enthusiasm concerns before they become issues.
I think people need different time shadowing for different roles. Like for some of our roles, it worked just to have one kind of like 2 weeks of trading off positions, just kind of at the end of the term, once someone had been elected already, to spend some time with them, and that was enough. That actually, for the vast majority of positions, I found that to be all right. For president and vice president, kind of the people that are already in the officer team are already shadowing, or they kind of should be. One-on-one shadowing is tricky because it's kind of showing who's interested and kind of who the people might want beforehand. So that can be dicey, but if done strategically, I think it could be really helpful for smoothing the transition.
Do any kind of shadowing before elections, then if you want to try and avoid controversy with it, I would make it open to anyone that's interested, that say like, if you're interested in running for president, you should come talk to me about what's involved with being president, and I can, you know, and you can attend an officer meeting and things like that. You don't want to give the appearance of the outgoing officers having their thumb on the scale for, you know, the elections. You know, in a smaller chapter where you only have one person running for any position, it may be less of an issue or a controversy. But I know in some of the bigger chapters where elections can be a little more contentious, you definitely want to avoid that sort of thing. So I would say be as open and transparent as you can, and make it as equal an opportunity for everyone.
So it really depends on what your schedule and how you do elections, and how that fits with your terms. But if you can do it, it's a great way to do on-the-job training. As far as if you're going to do shadowing prior to, which in my opinion would really be more suited for find out whether, let's just pick president, find out whether president is a role you'd be interested in running for, is really probably more what shadowing would accomplish prior to elections. And you may want to do something else. You know, I know chapters that will have a meeting where they'll go through all the officer positions, and current officers will be there to explain what they do. So that way anybody who's interested can go to one of these officer info sessions and find out what those roles actually entail, right? Which secretary is which, what does this secretary do? What does that secretary do? You know, what does cataloger do? You know, all of those things, what do they do? And that may be a better way to accomplish that particular task.
Okay, so some take-home messages really fast. If possible, get your future president to attend your district conference this spring. It doesn't have to be somebody who's like a president-elect or anything like that. It's just somebody who you think might be good is fine, because this really gets that energy up and gets people excited, I think. Also, establish the culture you want in your chapter, in your officer team. So this is that social aspect that all of the panelists keep talking about. You want to make it personable. You want to get to know everyone on a personal level so that you communicate better, interact better. And, you know, whether that's like, and you do it through doing like officer fun events or something like that, however you want to go about doing that, but make it very camaraderie. You want all that stuff there and present. Make sure you have an officer communications channel. So whether you use Slack, Discord, GroupMe, whatever you do, something that works for everybody. It could be regular text message too, just some way of communicating between your officers. Officer meetings are not the only time work can get done. Use officer meetings for items that require the group's attention and not something that can get done via text message. You want that time to be meaningful. So if it's something that's discussion worthy or like there are multiple differing opinions on something, that is the time to bring it up, is officer meeting. But for, you know, day-to-day stuff, you probably don't need to mention all of that and go through that one more time with everyone. Again, the president's role is not to do everything, it's to make sure everything gets done. That being said, you don't want to over delegate either. So make sure that you can do everything that you're assigning everybody else, and that, you know, you delegate properly, train people how to like do whatever you need to get done and explain your way. Communication always.